Okay, Julie Lowe is with us. Julie's a distinguished wife, mother, counselor, author, play therapist, speaker, and teacher. She hails from the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where she lives with her husband and 5 children who range in age from 13 to 22. She's a former faculty member at the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation, and she holds her MA in counseling from the Biblical Theological Seminary. She has more than 20 years of experience as a licensed professional counselor. She's authored several books, including the one we're going to talk about tonight, Safeguards. Amy Tassos has put all of her books for sale on the island in front of Fellowship Hall. She set up the self-checkout iPad. It's really easy to use, so do that if you would like one of her books on your way out. We're delighted to have Julie with us, and as soon as she's done with Barry, she's going to come up here and visit. Julie, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you.
All right, that all sounded much more distinguished than it actually is. So where to start? Safeguards, obviously, is the name of a book I've written, and maybe I'll just begin by telling you a little bit about, I've been counseling for about 25 years and work with families and children and churches, especially in consulting on abuse allegations and situations that arise. And I would perpetually get this question about how do we be preventative to protect children? And what I found myself coming back to over and over again is it starts in the home. It really starts with parents educating their kids, protecting their kids, but also educating their kids. So even this idea of safeguards isn't about the fact that we can keep our children safe from all peril. It is, our job is to put up safeguards to protect them, but it's also our job to equip our kids to be able to go into the world and not be of the world, to be able to go in the world and navigate it wisely. So what you'll hear me talk about is, I'll give you a little promotion about the book, which I hate doing because I don't like being self-promotional, but in the book itself, I talk about a lot of things from protecting against the thing we fear most, which is our kids being abused, but also thinking about issues like bullying, dating, drugs, alcohol, even thinking about how do we handle babysitters and what do we do about sleepovers and asking some of those hard questions. And we live in a world where people are very, very opinionated about this is how you should do it. And I hope what you hear me say tonight is less about opinions and more about principles. Because you can have freedom in the way you do some things in your home, in your parenting, but we always need to have biblical principles for why we do what we do. So tonight especially, I want to talk about what it looks like to think, well, what are the principles about safeguarding our children? And then what you do is you take that and you begin applying it. And so you see that in the book where I begin applying that to what does that look like in these situations like sleepovers and technology and bullying. And then as teens hit the teen years, and then even when they go into college and adulthood, how do you continue to keep your kids safe? And I'll try to give you some stories from our own home. So I love this picture. I think this picture kind of represents how we feel as parents sometimes, where we're just pouring out of ourselves. We're giving of ourselves to build our children up, and there's an investment in that. And sometimes that investment leads us to fear the outcome or to be driven by an outcome. And one of the things I say often is, my job is to faithfully parent my children. God's job is how they turn out, and their job. You know, between them and the Lord, they're moral responders. They're going to choose who they serve. They're going to choose whether they listen and walk with the Lord or do what's right and good. My job's, though, to faithfully parent them to the best of my ability and not control the outcome. My job also isn't success, at least the way the world defines success. My job is faithfulness to the task. So think about that for a minute. That is so important in your parenting and in talking about issues like this, because All you and I can do is faithfully disciple our kids to the best of our ability, and we have to let go of the outcome. They will choose whether they're going to walk in that or not. And when you and I become driven by outcome, we inadvertently rely on all kinds of poor ways of parenting because we're trying to determine or control an outcome rather than just be faithful to what the Lord's calling us to do. So 3 principles that you're going to hear me talk about tonight. The first is we all live in a broken, fallen world where evil both exists and pursues us. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Second is we teach our kids to navigate this world by giving them the ability to discern right from wrong, good from evil. And then thirdly, ultimately, safety does rest in the hands of the Lord, that you and I can do everything right, but we can't keep our kids from the world. Though some try to, right? I don't know, any of you ever see the movie The Village by M. Night Shyamalan? It is a picture of this that I'm talking about, where you build up high walls and you build up a safe world, at least you think that is safe, to keep the world out and protect the people you love. But what you forget is that our own hearts are evil and wicked, and that we also have to equip our kids. You know, I would talk to my kids when they were young all the time about bullying behavior and what to do if you see somebody being bullied or what to do if somebody mistreats you and how to handle that. But do you and I ever stop to think that maybe my child could be the bully? Or we fear our kids being groomed or our kids maybe receiving inappropriate messages or pictures on their phones, but have you ever stopped to consider your child could actually be the one sending the inappropriate message? And when we forget to speak to our kids in a way that reminds them of their own hearts that are prone to wander or be tempted, we miss something very foundational. So we need to equip them both internally, how they tend, where their vulnerabilities lie, where their temptations lie, but also making them aware of the potential dangers that exist out there and equipping them. And then we entrust them to the Lord, that you and I can lay our head down at night because we know that ultimately their safety is in the hands of the Lord. And that's it. You got the whole thing in less than 5 minutes. So we live in an evil world, or a world where evil exists. So in case we doubt that, here's several examples, right? Now, one of the foundational things I think we wrestle with is talking to our kids about the evil of the world. Why do we do that? We fear making them afraid, right? So I often hear parents say, well, Julie, if my kids aren't thinking about these things, I certainly don't want to bring them up because I don't want to put that fear in their head, or I don't want to put those thoughts in their head. But what we minimize is the reality that those things are probably already happening. And sadly, younger and younger our children are being exposed to things because technology exists all around them. So you can be doing everything right as a parent. Your children may not even have devices. All they have to do is get on a bus and sit by a child with a device, and it opens a world to them. All they have to do is go into Sunday school or go to a friend's house for a play date and go on the Xbox or have an iPad, and before you know it, they're exposed to pornography or something that you wouldn't have wanted them to see. So that you see, that's why it's never enough just to try to keep the world out from them, but to actually equip them to know how to engage when hard things happen, and to not do that in a fearful way. So hopefully the language you hear me share tonight, the way you hear me talk, is just very matter of fact. It's very casual. It's not fear-inducing. It's not producing fear, because when you parent out of fear or worry, you raise children that fear and worry. And what does the Bible say? Who by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Yet the Bible also says the wise man, the prudent man, sees danger and does what? He runs from it. So we can't be in denial that danger exists, because it says the prudent, the wise see it, and they actually run from it, they avoid it. We also can't produce kids that worry, because it doesn't add a single hour. As a matter of fact, worrying produces the same problems that not teaching kids do. It handicaps them, it prevents them from seeing genuine danger and responding to it. It prevents them from being able to go into the world and feel like they can navigate it. So parents who worry raise children who worry. Or you raise children who think you're a worrywart and they write you off completely and won't listen to what you have to say. So worrying is not a safety skill. Parenting out of fear is not a safety skill. It's being very matter-of-fact and comfortable talking about hard things. It's preparing them, and it's giving them wisdom to know how to deal with it. So the world uses language like intuition or spidey senses, right? And we tend to kind of poo-poo that because there doesn't seem to be any evidence behind it. The language of Scripture is discernment and perception. So let me give you an example. Worry versus perception of genuine danger. I got on a plane. I've been getting on lots of planes lately. You can imagine I could have all kinds of fear of flying or the plane crashing or a door flying off an airplane at any given time or the wheels not working. And when I'm traveling, sometimes I like to find a pleasure reading book and grab it and take it to the airport and read it with me. And I foolishly picked one out about 2 weeks ago without thinking what it was about. And it was all about a plane crash. Not a smart choice for getting on a plane. So I'm sitting at the airport looking at it going, oh dear, I can't believe I picked a book about a plane going down to read in an airport. What if I sat there and I began worrying about all those things? Is it going to help me? It's only going to stress me out. Does it equip me to do anything differently? Am I able to go around the plane and check all the safety locks and make sure the doors are it does nothing for me. What worry does is it projects into the future. It's about all the what ifs and all the fears and anxieties. Now what happens if I'm sitting there reading my book and I see my pilot stumbling out of a bar in the airport? Ding, 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 that's real fear. I better pay attention to that, right? Worry projects into the future. Perception pays attention to what's actually happening in the moment. It perceives accurately that something's amiss. Now, see, we can't always guarantee there's danger. Just like one of, I think, the problems for us in the church is sometimes we ignore concerning behaviors in people because we want to believe the best about them. We don't want to assume wrongdoing. And there's something good about that. But it's not good if we ignore behaviors or words or actions that are concerning. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. So we see the language, the nature of deception is it deceives us. You and I are deceived by people because they'll present themselves one way while evil is in their heart or ill intention is in their heart. And understanding the nature of that makes us more discerning when we're approaching people. So what do we want to teach our kids? We want to equip them to hear God's voice, to know right from wrong. Why is that the foundation of safety skills? That's my argument, that the foundation of raising safe kids really is to know God and his ways. Well, Hebrews 5:14 says it. It says, but solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment that come from what? Constant practice to distinguish good from evil. That lays it right out there for us. So what does that all mean? It means my job is to teach my children to distinguish good from evil. How do I do that? Constant practice. Role-playing, engaging with them, pointing things out, talking about things. It's this Deuteronomy 6 principle of whether I walk along the way or whether I sit down for dinner or whether I'm rising. Wherever I am discipling my children. I'm talking about the things of the Lord. I'm talking about the world and making sense of their experience through a biblical worldview. What does that constant practice do? It produces discernment. That's what our children need. We are raising children that are not very wise and discerning, and the world is infiltrating and winning them over. And so we want to teach our kids critical thinking. We want to teach them to learn to evaluate what? To evaluate people's words and behaviors. And I'd probably say this a few minutes from now, but we are notoriously bad at evaluating character. Why? Because as Scripture says, people deceive. They're good at it. They present one way, and we always see is how they present. We can't know their intentions. We can't know their heart. What can we know, though? Their words and actions, their behavior. So I don't teach my children to evaluate character. That feels ironic, doesn't it? I don't teach them to evaluate character. I teach them to evaluate words and actions. Why? Because we're called to judge words and actions. So we hear this language as, well, I'm not supposed to judge, or you're supposed to presume the best about everybody. And I say, yes, but we also are called to judge somebody's words and actions. That demonstrates who they are. So if I teach my kids the skill of evaluating words and actions, they will learn to notice things that are amiss far quicker. So years ago, I read a book by a man named Paul Ekman about telling lies, and he gives a study in the book about all kinds of professions, from lawyers to doctors to FBI agents to CIA agents to college students to teachers to, the whole gamut. And they do this study to find out who's the best at detecting deception. Who do you think was the best at it? Children? Well, to be honest, I forget who they actually, if it even tells me, but what did stand out in the study was FBI agents, CIA agents, the people in this field were no better than the college students at detecting deception. Now think how discerning college students are, by the way. What does that tell you if the FBI agents weren't any better at that? So what does that show us? The point is we're often not as good as we think we are at evaluating character, which is why we're often so shocked when people con us or deceive us, right? The takeaway is, but if we watch people's actions and their words, we'll pick up on things much better. That's the skill of evaluating good from evil. Now think of discernment. Hebrews here is saying discernment evaluates good from evil. Mature discernment also develops from not just right from wrong, good from evil, but mature from immature, wise from foolish, what's permissible versus what's profitable, right? So you see, when somebody grows in discernment and wisdom, they go from just black and white, this is right or wrong, to discerning things that seem morally ambiguous. Our children are growing up in a world that says good is evil and evil is good. Do we need them to be able to discern the morally ambiguous? Absolutely. How will they do that? Only by constant practice. Who's going to practice with them if not you and I? It's so foundational that it starts with us as adults, as parents, as people in the church, that we're giving our children the ability to discern right from wrong, what's permissible from what's profitable, what's wise from unwise, and that develops maturity in them. So let's talk about what that might look like. So, wisdom and discernment. Safety is not my ultimate goal for my kids. What should be? Teaching my children to walk with the Lord, to know God and His ways is always my ultimate goal for my kids. Safety is just going to be a fruit of that. Not just, it's a really important thing, right? But safetyism in the world is known as the highest goal, the highest priority being to keep people safe. And when you make that the highest goal, then the ends justify the means, right? And we will accept all kinds of secular ways of thinking or unwise ways of parenting because I'll keep my kids safe at all costs. But if my goal is I want my children to know God and His ways, well, then it makes sense I'm going to have safer children. I'm going to have wiser children. I'm going to have more discerning children. Why? Because I've taught them to navigate the world around them. I've taught them to understand human behavior, to ask questions, to be thoughtful in the way they deal with it. That does not raise fearful kids. It will raise confident, competent kids, and that's what we want. So talking about hard topics does not produce fear. It produces discernment and maturity. So let me get practical. What does that look like? Any of you guys, well, I'm not going to ask that question. The common thing it was previously was to teach stranger danger. I was going to ask how many of you teach stranger danger and then tell you it was wrong, so I'm not making you raise your hands. I caught myself. Stranger danger is a myth. Here's what I say to my kids. Strangers aren't dangerous. Dangerous people are dangerous. Brilliant, isn't it? Strangers aren't dangerous. Dangerous people are dangerous. How do you know if somebody's dangerous? You watch their words and actions. Dangerous people can be people you know and people you don't know. 90% of the time when children are abused, it is by somebody they know. somebody they trusted, somebody they even care about. So what good is stranger danger going to be teaching them? What it teaches them is that strangers are scary people that lurk in hallways and look like homeless people and are missing teeth, right? But if you're clean cut and friendly and you're approachable out in public, you must not be a stranger. And by the way, we teach stranger danger, but then we ask our kids to break it all the time by saying, talk to the nice waitress and tell them what you'd like to order. Tell the bank teller how much money you have. Say hello to the nice lady standing in Target with you in line. And by the end of it, our children think nobody's actually a stranger, and they don't know how to evaluate that. It's completely unhelpful. Not to mention, if your children were ever to be lost, their very ability to talk to a stranger is paramount. They need to know who to approach and what to say. But if I teach them strangers are dangerous, they don't learn who to go to when they're lost. So let's break that down for a minute. When your children are lost, previously what we were taught was what? Go find a police officer. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime I need a police officer to be around, they are not, especially when I'm driving down the highway and there's a maniac cutting me off and I'm wishing there was an officer. Now, think how many times a child is going to be able to find a police officer out and about. And for little children, anybody who's dressed in a uniform looks like a police officer, and they could be approaching anybody. So, what do? I tell my kids, go find a mom with kids. Why would I do that? Because the likelihood of me being anywhere with 5 children means there's also going to be other moms with kids around. The likelihood of that mom being a pedophile or a bad person is remotely slim, right? And the likelihood of that mother's maternal instinct setting in and not wanting to leave my child alone until they're reunited with me is very high. So I picked on my poor husband, and he would never do this because he's too smart. But I often say, you know what, if a child was lost and they went up to my husband and said, hey, I'm lost, can you help me? He'd probably go, yeah, right over there's a police officer. Or, if there's a customer service, go right over there. And every time I say that, he rolls his eyes because he truly would not do that. But if I were a parent, who am I going to want to be with my children if they're lost? It's going to be somebody who's going to be protective. And so my tendency is not politically correct, but it is statistically correct that more men abuse children than women. So I'm going to say, go find a mom with kids. Now, we've taught our kids to debate with us and to engage and to find the loopholes. Why? It gets them to think. It teaches them to evaluate, what they would do if they were lost. And so one of my sons is notorious for saying, well, what if there are no moms with kids? Well, I'm probably not taking you somewhere there aren't other mothers with kids. But if there aren't, go find a dad with kids. Well, what if there aren't any dads with kids? All right, honey, well, then go find a woman. What if there aren't any women? I'm like, well, now you're on a completely different planet than me, so I don't know where you're at. But that's really healthy for them to do, right? Because what they're doing is they are figuring out, what would I do? And what if I don't know? And what if you don't know if this is right or wrong? And they're asking all kinds of good questions where we're brainstorming together. And they're learning critical thinking skills. They're learning what if they would do. So we were at the doctor years ago when my boys were younger, and he goes through the litany of, do you wear your seatbelts? Do you wear a helmet when you ride your bike? Do you teach stranger danger? And the moment he said that, my boys turned and looked at me. And the doctor was glancing at me like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, we actually don't teach our kids stranger danger. You don't? Why not? Because strangers aren't dangerous. Dangerous people are dangerous. And went through my whole little spiel real quick and said, sorry, I'm a counselor. I just, I do this for a living. And he goes, well, somehow we got talking about who you'd go to. And I said, well, I tell my kids to go find a mom with kids. And he was highly offended as a male doctor. Well, why not a father? Oh, yeah, okay, you can tell your kids whatever you want. This is just what I tell my kids. And so I'm debating a doctor on why you shouldn't be teaching stranger danger. Why? Because that's a well-established way of keeping kids safe. Think about that. There's the principle, or there's the formula. Strangers are dangerous. Are they really dangerous? No. It's the dangerous people that are dangerous. And those are people you know, they're people you don't know. But we come up with a formula because if I have a formula, then I can keep my kids safe, right? That's what we believe. But unfortunately, that doesn't actually keep kids safe. It prevents them from even knowing and being able to get help should they ever be lost. So that's why you see that there is a lot of good stuff out there that will start telling you, here's how you keep your kids safe. And you've got to stop and say, it sounds good, but is it really wise? Does it keep my kids safe? So teach them what does. Teach them to recognize and discern what makes them uncomfortable. So I want you to pay attention to the language I'm using. Not what makes them unsafe, not they're in danger. I'm just saying what's uncomfortable. Notice. Pay attention to what makes you uncomfortable. So another example of a formulaic approach that we hear, and maybe some of you even subscribe to, is my children should never be forced to hug anybody they don't want to, even relatives. We're saying that because if you force them to do it, clearly we're establishing or setting them up to be groomed to be abused. I understand that. Unfortunately, that view makes me uncomfortable. You see the irony in that? Uncomfortable isn't necessarily bad. We don't know yet, right? But if the formula is, well, if you're uncomfortable, you should never make them do it, well, then I've raised children that never learn to show affection or never learn to evaluate when it's appropriate to share affection, right? There are instinctively kids that are overly affectionate, and you and I need to parent them in a little. And then there are kids that are afraid of affection or not touchy-feely. There's something okay with that, but also wouldn't it be helpful to teach them when it's appropriate to show affection? How do you teach that to them? They've got to learn to evaluate when it's okay. So for example, and we always pick on people we know because we want our children to learn that somebody you know could be inappropriate with you or make you uncomfortable. So I might say something, or one of our kids might say, Mommy, Grandma makes me uncomfortable. Why does Grandma make you uncomfortable? I don't want to hug her. She makes me uncomfortable. Why does she make you uncomfortable? Well, she smells like mothballs. All right, well, in that case, love moves towards what makes you uncomfortable, right? I make my kids uncomfortable all the time by making them brush their teeth and wear deodorant and put their shoes away. Uncomfortable isn't a bad thing, but it is a word to evaluate. So I want my kids to learn to pay attention. Does somebody make you uncomfortable because they're a little too touchy-feely? Well, that's okay to be uncomfortable. Let's talk it through. Does somebody make you uncomfortable because they're constantly in your space? That could be a bad thing. Or it could be somebody who has, a mental handicap and they don't know social boundaries. And I want my kids to learn, you know what? This person's not a danger. Love moves towards them. So press into that discomfort. It's actually a good thing. How do kids know that? They don't unless you and I teach them. So I can come up with a hard and fast rule. You should never have to hug anybody that makes you uncomfortable. But maybe the better rule is pay attention to what makes you uncomfortable, and then let's talk about it. And let's think through what to do with it. And you've got to start with people you know, not the strangers, but your own family, your own relatives, your own friends, their coaches, their teachers, their babysitters. Set the standard for them. So teach them to evaluate words and behavior, not character. Until they're old enough to know right and wrong or to be able to discern these things, you and I are supposed to be their protector, right? So think of the parent that goes into Target and says, all right, I have to get shopping. Your job is to keep your eyes on me. I can't be watching you. Well, you might say that to make your kids pay attention, but I really hope you don't believe that. Because until they're old enough, it is your job to keep your eyes on them and to keep them safe. Why? Because a 5-year-old is going to be distracted by any shiny object, anything that smells like candy, anything that looks like candy, anything that's wagging its tail walking around. It's our job until they're old enough, until they have the skills to protect themselves. It is our job to do that. How do we do that? Well, we let them know no topic is off limits, no problem is too hard to talk about, which means we've got to model talking about hard things like gender and sex and pornography. And of course, we always need to do it in developmentally appropriate ways, but it is far better to be proactive than reactive. We want to proactively shape the way our children see the world around them rather than to go back and reactively debunk an inaccurate view. Because somebody will be speaking into their world and you won't like what they have to say. You and I have to be the voice. We have to be the influence. We have to show that we have something to say to them. And how do we do this? Well, role playing, that constant practice that Hebrews talks about. So let me give you an example. Our two daughters were in the foster care system. We adopted them. They were used to getting in cars with lots of different social workers and strangers and would very happily walk off with anybody. And so once we knew we were adopting them, we knew, you know what, we better work on this and teach them not to just walk off with anybody, because we knew that they were likely to do that. They were just very trusting. They were used to doing it. So we began role-playing them early on, and I would give them samples and say, you know what, guys, it's not good to go off with anybody who asks you to, whether they say they lost a dog, or they have some fun candy or toy in their car, or they're taking you to see somebody. If anybody asks you to go somewhere with you alone, here's what I want you to say. No, I have to talk to my mom and dad first, and then run and find us. And then I told them, hey, we're going to role play, we're going to practice. And every once in a while, I would throw it out to them. And I'd say, hey, little girl, I have some candy in my car. You want to come get it? Like, yeah. And if they would want to go with me. Or, hey, little girl, we'd be at the park playing, and I'd walk up and say, hey, I think I saw a puppy over there behind that car. You want to go with me? And they go, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't go with that. You shouldn't go. Here's what you should say. And so we'd practice and practice and practice until one day, my daughter, I did one of these to her. I think I said, hey, little girl, I have a puppy in my car. There's a puppy in the car. You want to see it? And she went, no, I have to talk to my mom. Good job. And I'm rewarding her for saying it. Then I go to her sister. I say, hey, I've got some candy. You want to come get some in my trunk? And she'd look at me. And every single time she'd say yes. And finally, I got to the stage where she'd look at me and she'd go, what kind of candy? What did that just tell me about her? Where her vulnerabilities were, right? What she was saying without saying it is, I could be bought. Yeah, I could be kidnapped. Just give me the right temptation and I'll go willingly with you, even though she knew it was wrong. And you know, that actually proved to be true of her personality. I mean, the Lord was showing us something about the need to parent her that was a vulnerability, that was a temptation, a weakness in her life. And so even how role-playing helps us understand our children better, where they might never be tempted to struggle, where they might be often tempted to struggle. But as that constant preparing them, in a way, you see, they weren't scared when I was doing that with them. I wasn't traumatizing them or making them afraid of bad people. I was calm, I was matter of fact, it was kind of fun for them. Matter of fact, the danger was still, did they really believe that somebody might actually do that? Because kids that grow up in safe homes aren't afraid, they're equipped. And if you're talking in very normal, casual ways like I am, you're not inducing fear in them, yet that's our fear that we are. Now there's the exception, right? There are our kids that just tend to be naturally fearful to begin with. And you still need to teach them this, but you're probably going to be a little more winsome or careful in the way you do it, because you know that they are prone to fear, no matter how well you teach them, but they still need to grow in confidence and competence. So this idea of constant role-playing. So here's what else we would say. How do you role-play? You and I can't possibly come up with every scenario that exists. So here's what I would say to my kids. I would say, guys, if somebody tells you the right thing to do, you should always listen. If it's us, if it's a coach, if it's a teacher, if it's a babysitter, if it's your sibling, how often do we want to hear that, right? What do siblings say to each other? You're not my mom, you're not my dad. Well, no, but are they telling you the right thing to do? Then guess what? You should always listen. It doesn't matter if they're 2 years old or 20 years old or 90 years old. If they're telling you the right thing to do, you should always do it. Likewise, if somebody is telling you the wrong thing to do, you should never listen, and we will support you. This is so key to say. You know why? Because I don't often have to teach my kids to disobey. I am spending a majority of my parenting life teaching them to obey and comply. But what we miss is a safety skill is our kids need to learn when it's good and right to defy authority, right? Especially ungodly authority or authority that is dangerous. So the principle isn't you always obey authority. The principle isn't you never have to listen to people younger than you. The principle is if somebody tells you the right thing to do, you should always listen. It doesn't matter who they are. Likewise, if somebody's telling you the wrong thing to do, you should never listen. It doesn't matter who they are. And we will support you. Why is that important? Because our kids need to hear, Mom and Dad will support me if I disobey an authority figure and I'm afraid of getting in trouble. At least I know Mom and Dad will support me. And then you and I have to role play. Because the chances are slim that they're going to experience that right away and believe it. But majority of the time, I'm telling my kids why they should have been obeying and listening to their teachers, not why they should be defying their authority. So I've got to demonstrate it. Let me give you an example. We would often pick on our poor babysitters or relatives, we would tell people. But I would say to my kids, guys, if I came home from going out with my husband and the kids were complaining about the babysitter, we would say, honey, did Melanie tell you the right thing to do? Yes. Well, then you should always obey, right? And if Melanie tells you the wrong thing to do, you never have to obey, and we will support you. She doesn't tell us the wrong thing to do. Good. We'll keep Melanie around for a while then, right? What are some things, and here's what we would say to them, what are some things Melanie might tell you to do that are wrong? I don't know. Why? Because they don't think Melanie would tell them to do anything wrong. Or they're complaining about what she makes them do. She made me go to bed early. She made me brush my teeth. Is that wrong to do? No. Then you should listen to Melanie. What are some things Melanie could tell you to do that are wrong? And initially, they might not come up with examples, or they might come up with something silly, but eventually they'll get around to things like, well, maybe Melanie lets us watch a show that you don't let us watch. You're right, that would be wrong, and you don't have to do that, and we will support you. What if Melanie asked you to lie to us about what you ate, or what she let you do outside, or what she let you watch? That would be wrong, and you shouldn't do it, and we'll always support you. And then they get on a roll. They begin thinking all the things that Melanie might tell them to do that are wrong, and we're saying that's right, and if she told you to do that, we'll support you. So we're starting with the things that they could potentially imagine happening. Then we often go to silly and ridiculous stuff that might get them laughing, like, well, what if Melanie told you to go running down the middle of the street barking like a dog? And they're laughing. No, Melanie would never tell me to do that. You're right, probably not. But if she did, you should say no, and we will support you. What if Melanie told you to hit your brother? Oh, that would be bad. You're right, that would be bad, and you should never do it, and we will support you. What if Melanie asked you to take your clothes off and take a bath with her? That would be wrong. And some of the kids might say, oh, that's gross. She wouldn't do that. I hope not. But if Melanie, a babysitter, anybody ever told you to do that, you should never do it, and we will support you. What am I doing? I am modeling the whole gamut from the possible to the ridiculous to the dangerous for my kids. And I'm saying, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's the wrong thing to do, you shouldn't do it, and we will support you. That message our kids need to hear. They're growing up in an increasingly godless culture that is teaching them all kinds of immorality and values. If they're not learning to do that in safety skills, are they learning to do that in world systems and world views and attitudes? And are they learning to stand up against a godless system to speak what is right and good? They need to learn the skill of critical thinking, of evaluating words and actions and behaviors. So they're not looking at somebody's character and saying, well, it's Melanie. She's a good person. We trust her. Mom and Dad trust her. We have to obey. They're saying, is Melanie asking me to do, is that good and right, or isn't it good and right? That's practice. Will my kids get it wrong? Yeah. Will my kids debate back? Yeah. So one of my sons will say, well, what if we don't know if it's right or wrong? Good question. What's an example of that? And they're usually like, I don't know. I'm like, well, I don't know either. Give me an example. And at some point they'll say, well, what if a grown-up wants us to go somewhere and we don't know if you'd want us to? Well, come ask me. Well, what if you're not around? Okay, good question. What if I'm not around? Well, here's probably what I want you to do. If I'm not around and a grown-up wants you to go somewhere private or alone with them, go find another grown-up you trust and tell them and ask them if you should go. Because if nothing else, now there's another set of eyes on the situation. So what are we doing? Constant practice. We're role-playing. Are my children afraid? Are they now thinking they're going to get kidnapped? Shouldn't be. I'm equipping them. Now again, there's a few fearful kids that might run with that and go, what if this happens? What if that happens? But guess what? That was probably already in there. stirring in them. And now you're bringing it and putting it on the table, and you're helping them dialogue and engaging with them. And we'll say the same to our kids, guys, if we ever tell you to do the wrong thing, you probably shouldn't listen to us either. But hopefully we would never do that, right? And so it's teaching kids to evaluate right from wrong, good from evil, wise from unwise. And you know what? When they're young, it often starts with peers. So it's not that we're teaching them all about abuse, it's we're teaching them about friendships. It's true. If your friend tells you to do something bad, like steal a cookie, you shouldn't do it. If a friend teaches you to say mean words to another girl or boy, you shouldn't do it. If your friend teaches you to kick the dog, you shouldn't do it. It's wrong. You're working on their level, but then you and I also have to model the potential dangerous things that they might not know about or might not ever be able to conceive that somebody could ask them to do. You've got to put it out there, because should it ever happen to them, they need to know that we've modeled, Mom and Dad will want to know about this. Mom and Dad told me that this could be a possibility. They're safe people to go to. And also talking about who are the safe people they can go to if they're ever in trouble. And you see, as kids get older and they get to their teen years or middle school, you're talking about things like cell phones and technology and sexting and what to do when you see pornography, or what to do if you're asked out on a date, or what to do if you get in a car and with your friends and all of a sudden, before you know it, they're smoking pot or they're doing something inappropriate. Our kids need to see modeled that we're not going to be angry at them, that sometimes due to no action of their own, they find themselves in dangerous or inappropriate situations, and that we will support them if they get help. Where the average child, this stuff happens all the time. So you think of a 14-year-old who you say, yeah, you can go to the movie with your friends, or a 16-year-old who drives. Yeah, you can go to the movie with your friends. What movie are you going to? Where will you be after? What time will you be home? You've done your due diligence as a parent. You send your child off with their friends. They get in the car, and on the way to the movie, the driver says, hey, so-and-so wants to go with us. You mind if I swing by and pick him up? They swing by and pick up 2 other friends. You didn't know your child was going to do that. Your child didn't know that they were going to do that. But here they are now picking up 2 other friends. Those 2 other friends are a little shady. But your son or daughter aren't thinking anything of it. They're just like, okay, well, I'm not driving. They can go along. Mom and Dad know where I am. I still told them the truth. But before you know it, those friends are bringing out drugs, or they're talking about stopping at somebody else's house. And before you know it, your child is in the car with people and has no control over the outcome. And maybe you and I think, well, they should just be strong enough that they say, let me out of the car, I'm calling my parents. That's expecting a lot from a child who doesn't know that they're in danger, or they might think that they're going to be in trouble with you, or maybe they think there's nothing wrong with it. But before you know it, they're stopping at somebody else's house, or somebody's now driving under the influence, and your child feels like, I don't know how to get out of this. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't ask for it to happen, but if I call Mom and Dad now, they're going to be so mad at me. I'm going to be so grounded. But if you and I are putting that out there and saying, hey guys, sometimes this happens with teenagers. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation that you didn't plan. Maybe you should have said no first off, but you didn't think it was a big deal. Now you're realizing it's a big deal. Now you're afraid we're going to be mad at you. But you know what? If in good faith you call us to say, Mom and Dad, I need your help getting out of the situation. Or we have a code phrase that I know you're in trouble and you want me to come get you. I will get you. I will support you. I will not be angry at you. We may still need to talk, but I will support you for doing that. Do you see, how often are we having those kind of conversations with our young people? So we may one time have the stranger danger talk, or one time what if you get lost talk, but it has to be a constant role playing, because safe kids never think they're going to be in those situations. And a one-time conversation never works. It's a repetitive situation. And as they get older, it's applying it to the situations they'll find themselves in, from being young to being middle school to high school to driving and independence and all the dangers of college life, or the fun and positive things about college life. We proactively raised our children to do this. About 2 years ago, my oldest daughter in college, making good choices, working for a local preschool program, took a break around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and decided she was going to drive to a local coffee shop and sit in her car and drink coffee and get a break and probably surfing Pinterest. Who knows what she was doing. But as she was she began pulling out and rolling up her window to go back to work. An elderly gentleman about the age of her grandfather came walking towards the car. So she rolled her window down thinking maybe she had a flat tire. And he said this. He said, "I've been watching you for the last 20 minutes. You have pretty eyes," and threw something in her lap. She was like, that was weird. And she began rolling her window up and pulling out. And when she looked down, it was a $50 bill in her lap. What do you do with that? At 5 years old, I could not have thought of that scenario to say, I should really tell my daughter, if this ever happens to her, here's what you do. At 15 years old, I would not have come up with that scenario. At 20 years old, I had not come up with that scenario. Do you see how if we rely on formulas, that we will miss moments like that we can't possibly come up with, but our children will be faced with, that will require them to apply, what do I do in an uncomfortable situation? How do I evaluate these words and actions? Was I safe or unsafe? Who do I tell? Do you see, giving the skills to evaluate that is far more important than thinking you and I can come up with every possible dangerous situation and prepare our kids for it. Formulas won't save them. Wisdom and discernment will. That's why it is far better to teach them those skills and to take those principles and begin to apply them to the life they're living in, with their peers, with temptations to cheat or whatever it might be. It's doing Deuteronomy 6, where we're looking for every opportunity to enter into their world and apply biblical principles and help them learn how to navigate those things. That produces safety. So you see again here, language, noticing, paying attention, asking why does that make you uncomfortable. The skill is learning to evaluate those things. So not alarmist language I'm using everyday language that is teaching them to pay attention and notice. So I love this picture here. If you can't read it, it says, easy decisions lead to a hard life. Hard decisions lead to an easy life. You could substitute that with easy conversations lead to hard life. Hard conversations lead our kids to an easier life, or maybe a wiser one. We could probably fill in all kinds of adjectives, but do you see how easy it is for you and I to think, well, this will probably never happen, so I'm going to avoid talking about it, or this is an awfully uncomfortable, awkward subject for me, so I'm not going to avoid it until I know I need to. But the problem is you and I wait far too long, and our kids are normally exposed to things, and they've already written you and I off as inconsequential or inadequate in speaking to those things. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to talk sooner rather than later. We need to talk and inform the way they think about a subject, not wait until they've been tainted by somebody else's opinion of it. And then what? Ultimately, safety rests in the hands of the Lord. I can do everything right, and hard things still happen to my children. And I've got to trust that the Lord has my kids in their hands, that there is no promise of protection from every dangerous thing. As a matter of fact, there's a promise there will be trials and tribulations and struggles for our young people. So isn't it far better to equip them to know how to navigate this world and then to hand them over to the Lord, to teach the Lord that He is with them, that He goes before them, that He goes beside them, that He's behind them, that whether they face something scary or hard or challenging or difficult, that the Lord always goes with them into those things. That the answer is not the promise of God's protection, but the promise of His presence in the midst of danger, and that He will give wisdom and discernment to navigate that. What a beautiful picture of how to walk through life, that we don't have to live by fear. Because if it always rests in you and I to figure life out and to be safe, well, our world becomes very small, becomes very controlled, and it becomes very godless, meaning it's just void of God. We bring God back into it, and we realize that ultimately we rest in trusting Him with our life. That's where the hope lies. So, let me stop there, and I will open it up for questions, feedback, pushback, input. Any thoughts or questions? What did she do with the 50? Good question. We all went shopping. No, we didn't. Well, what's interesting, I should have finished that story. She immediately sensed the discomfort of that. Something was wrong. That was weird. And then she saw the money. And again, because it's not the world she lived in, she didn't even have a frame of reference to put it in, except as she's driving back to work, the more she thought about it, the more it struck her as inappropriate. I mean, it did right away, but I mean, there was a growing sense, this is bad, this isn't good. He didn't mean anything good by this. And then she gets to work and she told a coworker who said, he's a pedophile, he's this. And so she got more emotional until about an hour or two later, she called me upset over what had happened. And so we walked through it where I said, honey, you are right to be upset. Actually, you're reading the situation right. It was inappropriate. We can't know what was going on internally inside of him. We can only know his words and actions, but they point to nothing appropriate that was going on inside of him, right? It's a good example of some ways something that's very anticlimactic. Nothing bad actually happened to her, but in some ways something utterly inappropriate and uncomfortable did happen to her. And so it was this great teaching moment to help walk her through how to think about it and say, you don't actually have to know his intention, you just have to know his behavior. And it was wrong and immoral and inappropriate and disrespectful. As we went through all that, and then we started talking about, all right, now knowing all that, would you have done anything differently? Like, would you have stopped the car and walked in and called the police? Would you have talked to a manager? Would you have just kept driving? Because the most important thing is to get out of that situation and get away with them. And we kind of talked through that whole gamut, which was a really good thing to do because there's not a necessarily black and white way of responding in that moment. And then the last question was, so what are you going to do with the money? And she gave it away to a ministry. I was so proud of her because I'm like, go do something fun with it. And she's like, no, I'm going to give it away. Okay, yeah, that was a more mature answer than I gave you. Other thoughts or questions?
Good story.
Yeah, I guess so.
I have a 5 and 7-year-old, and my 5-year-old kind of just goes far ahead, is no cares.
Free spirit.
Overly affectionate, and so we talk to her a lot about staying with us and not, you know, the fact that someone could try to take you that's not mommy or daddy. There are adults out there that can try to take you because it's scary to me because she will go so far. But her question then is, well, why would they take me and what would they do with me? And I don't know how to answer that because I don't want to be like, well, they're going to sell you into sex trafficking.
Yeah, probably wouldn't tell a 5-year-old that.
So, I don't say that, but I want to know what you think the right response could be.
Well, a lot of times kids are just okay with saying they might hurt you. They might do mean things or bad things, and a lot of times that will settle them. So yeah, that's a great example of when I have a child like that, then I do want to rein them in. I want them to have a healthy trepidation of the world around them. Or even things like, well, you could run out in front of a car, things could happen, or a stray dog could come out, and I'm not close enough to help intervene. And so there are ways where I could buffer some of the dangers until they get older and just say, and that actually goes back to role playing, why I also think it's good when kids do see things that you're helping them make sense out of it. So some kids see things on the news or they hear stories, they come home and say, I heard about a school shooting. And it's actually good to stop and talk about those things with your kids. And what would you do if you were in that school? Or that's really sad, yeah, those kids died. And not to be afraid of those conversations, because it's also a moment to point them to the Lord. A fearful kid is going to be afraid of that happening. So you can run the whole gamut of how you choose to explain that. And kind of a carefree, spirited child needs a little bit of healthy trepidation. But then a fearful child needs a little bit nudge to not be afraid and to go out and explore and take risks. So you see how we do parent according to the needs of our children. That coming up with a formulaic way of approaching all kids will miss some kids that maybe fall outside that bell-shaped curve. And so that's the wisdom of parenting, to say, knowing this is her, how she's wired, then I need to help her make better decisions. Which is what we need to do with our daughters. They really free spirit, it would have gone off with anybody. We need to start teaching, no, there's healthy guardrails to put up to keep you safe. My youngest son, for reasons we don't know, has always been afraid of somebody breaking in the middle of the night and kidnapping him. Like, not so afraid he's up at night, but you were to talk to him, or we'd go into a store and he would still be 12 years old and I'd say, hey, I'm gonna be in the aisle over here. And he'd go, no, don't leave me, I'm coming. I'd say, no, honey, you're safe. I will never leave the store without you. What if I can't find you? I said, trust me, you can find me. I'm never going to leave the store without you. And all you would have to do is go to customer service and say, what's my name? What's my phone number? And we just go over this over and over again. Why? Because he had that kind of trepidation. So I'm encouraging him that he needs to branch out and that you're safe in certain boundaries and guardrails. And so every child, you're probably you're swaying one direction or the other in how to speak in ways that are going to be helpful and productive according to their needs. And you can do everything right and your children still struggle. And we have lots of stories of those things too. And we, everywhere we would go with our kids at very early ages, we'd say, okay, this is literally less than a 30-second talk. So it's not like we would lecture our kids about safety everywhere we go. But we get out of the car to go to a park, or we get out of the car to go for a hike, or we get out of the car to go to an amusement park. All right, guys, what do you do if you get lost? Go find a mom with kids. Until they were like rolling their eyes. Go find a mom with kids, right? And what would you tell them? Your name's Julie Lowe. Your phone number is 267. And they'd go over the right. I'm like, okay, good, And off we go. Or oftentimes we say, listen, guys, if you do get lost, what's something big here that you would be able to find? And we'll meet you there. And here's who you would go to if you're lost. And so we come up with these plans, like if you're lost. And we do this all the time ad nauseum. They could literally roll their eyes and say it rote memory. So we went to an amusement park in Pennsylvania where we're from, and it got really late one night, and we were staying overnight somewhere. So at the time, my littlest was 2, so all the kids wanted to stay and ride the rides at night because that's the coolest thing when you're younger. So I took our toddler and went back to the hotel, and my husband stayed with the 4 other kids. And imagine amusement park at night. Bright lights, everything shining and flashing, loud music, big crowds. And of course, 3 kids want to go on one ride, and then the one son wants to go on another ride. So he diplomatically got them on this ride and say, when you get off, I'll be right here at the exit. I'm going to walk William over to this ride, get him on, and I'll be waiting in between the 2 rides for you all, so when you get off. So he does all that. And the 3 kids are in line, and as siblings often do, they start arguing, and 2 decide to change their mind and say, we're getting off the ride, and we're going to go join William. And their sister's like, you shouldn't do that. Dad said to stay on here. And she's wagging her finger, and they ignore her, and they get off the ride, and they go look for the entrance of the other ride, and they can't find it. Why? Because it's 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. It's dark. There's lights. They can't figure out where to go. So my husband put 3 on and 1 comes off. And he goes, well, where's your siblings? I told them, Dad, not to get off the ride. I told them not to do it. Look, wasn't I a good kid? I stayed on the ride. Look at me. And he's like, where are your siblings? They're with William. They got on the other ride. William gets off the ride. There's no 2 siblings. So now 4 went in, 2 came off, and he's missing 2. So they were lost. When my husband finally found them, who do you think they were with? Not a mom with kids. They were with a group of teenagers. The worst possible group you could go to. Not the last, literally the lowest on the priority if I were to go through everybody that would exist of who you should be going to if you're lost. And that's who he found them with. Why? Because everything they learned went out the window when they were scared. Right? And aren't you and I like that? We freeze. In moments where we can't make sense of things, we tend to freeze. Or even socially awkward moments where we don't know what to say to people, everybody gets quiet and does nothing. So why would we expect our children aren't going to fall prey to that? So they go to people, teenagers look like adults to them. They certainly don't act like adults, though. And so my husband finds them. He tells that, he starts lecturing them, why in the world were you got with teenagers? Like, those are the worst people to go to. And by the time they get to the hotel, everybody's crying and everything's a wreck. And the irony was, it was probably the one time I hadn't gone through my little spiel. And so I was at the hotel room, and that thought actually crossed my head, we didn't do our little safety spiel today. Like I need to do it for the 150th time. Well, apparently I did. But even if I did, would they have walked around all night thinking, now, who am I going to go to should I be lost tonight? Safe kids don't think that way, right? That's why the constant practice is so significant, because if you think you say it once or twice and your kids should know what to do, you're wrong. just like you and I freeze in moments we don't know what to do. Other questions or thoughts?
I have a question.
Yeah.
One of the things you talked about is really focusing on teaching your children to evaluate not character, but
Words and actions.
how do you do that in this kind of digital world where all of the character, all of the,
Yeah,
it's all words and actions that are kind of manipulated to whatever they.
exactly. Yeah, and so as you brought that up, because technology is a whole nother, we could spend 2 hours just talking about what to do with technology, but if you're teaching, you don't give out personal information to people. That's why even what you tell a stranger, you say, here's my mom and dad's name, here's their phone number. You don't have to tell them where you live, you don't have to tell them your social security number, your birthday. And so even digitally to say that, like people can present themselves like they're your age, but you can't actually see them, you don't know. What if people start asking for personal information? What personal information would be bad to ask for online? What personal information is okay to ask for? What might people be doing with it? You see, I'm asking them the questions because I want to get them to think. So that is where a ton of grooming, that's the new field of grooming goes, because you can go on any chat room or any Xbox Live or any Snapchat and you can pretend to be anybody. And so to say to kids, it's really easy to hide. And most kids get this because most kids will sometimes do it themselves. They like to put on a persona on social media, right? We like to present ourselves one way. But then you say things like, well, listen to what they ask you. Are they asking you personal information? Are they asking you what you look like? Are they asking you your birthday? So what would be information, and that's just where you're brainstorming with them, what would be information that's appropriate to give over a computer, over technology? What would be inappropriate conversation? What might be reasons it's inappropriate? And it's not always abuse. Sometimes it's financial abuse, right? Stealing money or deceiving, or this literally just happened to me a week ago. Here I am, a counselor, I work in these fields, and I get a message on my phone one day that it is from a detective who says, we need to call you, we need to talk to you about a situation with 2 minors and an adult. Like, oh no, that sounds serious. I wonder what this is about. So I call him back, begins giving me this spiel that you missed a court hearing where you were supposed to be testifying. I'm not supposed to be testifying. And he said, well, do you work for so-and-so or do you work at this place? And I said, oh no, that's not me. You have the wrong Julie Lowe. And he's like, well, that may be, but right now you have a bench warrant out for your arrest. Well, I have to tell you, my mouth dropped open because the last thing he said enough information to make me think, well, this could be a counseling situation. Maybe I'm mixed up with somebody. And half an hour he had me on the phone, and I thought I was going to have to drop everything I did that day, that I was going to have to go downtown an hour away, that I was going to have to show up to a court, that I was going to have to go through fingerprinting and all these things to get out of this. Had me in hook, line, and sinker until he said, and there's going to be a bond. And let me explain how bonds work. And all of a sudden, I went ding, ding, ding. And I sat there, I thought, are you kidding me? I think I just fell for a con. And I was totally wrapped into it. And eventually I said, you know what? I'm just going to go to my local police department. I'll go to somebody here. Because I still was like, my nerves were, I was afraid. Like, what if I did have a warrant out? What if I am confused with somebody? And I said, you know what, I'm just going to go to a local police officer. He said, well, I wouldn't do that for you if I were you because they probably will have to arrest you right away. I'm like, fine, I'll get arrested, and hung up. But I sat there for a good 15 minutes going, what do I do? Do I really need to go to the local station? Is this real? I still wasn't 100% sure. That's how convincing some people can be. And then I started working my way out of it. I started doing what I'm saying here, like think about what he was saying, think about what he was doing. Wait a minute, it doesn't make a sense you'd have a bench warrant out for me. I never got anything in the mail. I never got any phone calls. I never got any emails. So the more I started untangling this, the more I'm like, this was a con. All right, I'm convinced it's a con. And then I went home, I let my husband listen to it, and he goes, oh, this sounds really real. Maybe you should go to the police station. I'm like, oh, I just convinced myself it wasn't real. And eventually we learned it wasn't. It was a scam. The phone number was disconnected. But here I teach this. I do this for a living. And I was brought into it. Why? Because convincing people are convincing. And it was only when I started breaking down, wait a minute, real officers don't ask for money online. Real officers don't disconnect their phone. Real officers aren't going to arrest somebody for failing to show up for something in court. Real officers send you things. And like, I was just going through that and going, that's what convinced me that this wasn't accurate. So people are out to deceive for lots of different reasons, for scams, for money, for all kinds of things for our kids, and helping them understand that. You know, I don't have to go to the worst, most dangerous situation. I can just say, sometimes people want your personal information. Sometimes they want your financial information. There's all kinds of reasons those things happen. So sorry, that was a long, drawn-out answer for what you had. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Okay, so you talk about how you're their guardian or their protector until they're
Old enough.
I think what I struggle with is just knowing that, you know, as kids get older, like you gave the example of the sport, and you want to give them more freedom and let them do things, but I think the world just feels so scary, and so it's just trying to discern that wisdom of when they're able to go and be at the movies with their friends by themselves, and I don't know, just I know there's not just a set number or anything like that, but just if you have any guidance on how you made that decision for your own family.
Well, see, this is why it's so important that you know your children really well, because one child may be mature enough to handle and navigate certain situations and another not at all. I mean, we do that with our cell phone. We shouldn't ask at what age to give a cell phone. We should ask, is my child mature? Are they responsible? Is there a need? And can they stand against a powerful tide that will take them away? So you go through all those all those questions to come to that solution. We had kids that maybe at a certain age we'd say, yeah, I think there's a reason, and I think you're mature enough to handle this, and here's the guardrails we put up. Then I would say we had children where you're not going to get a cell phone until you're 40 years old. Why? Because I know that you will use your superpowers for evil and not for good. That we know their vulnerabilities, and that to give this to you will harm you. And so our kids say, well, it's not fair. And here's what you say. You say, we don't do what's fair. We do what's right and good for each of you. Why? Because that's what Christ models to us. God does not treat us all the same. He doesn't do what's fair. He does what's right and good for each of us, which means love is very personal. What are my children's vulnerabilities? Where will they struggle? When can I give more freedoms? When do I need to be more cautious? When do they need to earn the ability to be trusted in certain situations? But that idea of constant role-playing is so important, because if I want my child to be able to go to the movies with friends, then I'm going to, a long time before that happens, have conversations. What kind of movies do you think are appropriate? What should you do if you're in the movie theater and somebody sits by you and they're making you uncomfortable? What do you do if like a group of guys approach you at the movie theater? What would you do if you're walking back to your car after the movie theater? And I'm just brainstorming and making sure that they know how to think about paying attention to their surroundings, being alert. Maybe it's more the problem of temptations of peers. Are these good friends? Are these friends that you should hang out with? Are these friends that might try to convince you to do something that all the parents don't know you're doing? And how would you handle that? And, you know, by your time your kids get to the age where they're starting to navigate independence, you start to see where they're trustworthy or not trustworthy, or where they may struggle or not struggle. And so that constant practice is getting them to think, putting out there what your expectations are, and then you've got to give them the ability to practice. And so how can I do that in safe ways? Because if my kids are going to fail, I'd rather they fail in ways that are safe and aren't going to have lasting repercussions. So it's important I do teach them to talk to strangers. It's important I do say, especially my shy kids, I would say, honey, I want you to go up and ask the person there in the mall where to find this store. No, don't make me do that. Yeah, do that. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right with you, but you need to do the talking. Why? Because I need to know that you can approach people when you need help. So what's a safe way to do that? Just go ask a question. Go ask where to find a store or where to find this, because I'm giving you that constant practice. So it's not just talking, it's actually engaging them in helpful ways.
What if they know the right answer? How do you
What if they know the right answer,
test? Yeah.
but you don't know if they really mean it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Time will tell, right? Situations will tell. So I will err on the side of giving my kids opportunity. And then if they blow it, well, you've shown me that either I can't trust you or you have more to learn. And some kids will, some kids won't. Some kids will have every intention of doing what's good, but then they're tempted or, peers will change their mind. And we can't always predict that, but we've got to give our kids the ability to navigate some of those situations. So I'm always evaluating. I want to give my kids the ability to succeed, to try new things. Are they mature enough? Do I think they know the right things? Now I got to see if they're going to do it. And I might find out, I might not. But one of the things I would say to my kids is, you know what? The Lord knows. And so when I don't go with you, the Lord goes with you. And I'm going to pray that he does convict you to do what's right and good. And if you're not, then I'm also going to pray that the Lord will bring to light what's hidden and that we'll find out, because it wouldn't be good for you to get away with doing the wrong thing. So I think that is the wisdom issue of parenting, that we can't always keep our kids from doing the wrong thing either. We can only do our part in parenting them. Is there a question? Yeah.
We have a 4-year-old who's very affectionate. Her love language is just
We've got a family member who I don't feel like is a safe person. How would you communicate that to a 4-year-old who has decided that this person
Is safe. Yeah, so 4-year-old who's very affectionate, but you have somebody close to you who you think is not somebody you'd want her to be affectionate with. What do? I would talk to her about that, or I might just come up with, how would I do that? I probably, these aren't exactly the words I'd use, but I'd probably say something like, honey, it's not okay to go around hugging everybody. Some people like to be hugged, some don't. You always have to ask. You can talk about when's affection good and right and when should we withhold it. And then there's some people I might not want you to show affection to or hug. And here's an example of this person I'd really rather you not hug. And they'll ask why. And you can say, I just don't think it's a wise thing. Or I might give something that nebulous for now and just say, I just want you to listen to me and obey me, that here's what you can do. You can fist bump, or you can shake hands, or you can high five, but I wouldn't want you to climb on their lap or hug them. So you're just walking through. There's relationships where that's appropriate, and here's one that's not. And it can be that simple. If they were older, I might try to go into it a little bit more, and that's the wisdom issue, right? Like what's maturity level where you explain things to kids, and the older they get, the more I want to explain. The younger they are, the more simple I want to keep it. And so I would just say, honey, just for now, you need to accept this is what we want you to do. And this is the right affection to show with this person. And so I try to focus on the things that they could do and the things they shouldn't.
So I'm going to go one step further. It's my dad.
The grandpa of the family. So this is not a real life scenario, but for the folks who have this scenario, it's your grandpa that you're going to celebrate. So for a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
Would it be the same answer? You would give the same answer?
It would, and depending on the situations. But I hope that I also realize if it's a 4-year-old, it's my job to never leave that child alone with that person if I feel unsafe. Like that's a good example of I'm their protector, because at 4 years old, it probably is too much to expect, especially if I know their tendency is to be really affectionate. I'm still going to say those things to my child, but then I'm going to realize I'm the buffer, that I never should leave them alone, especially with a relative we're close to. And I probably should speak to that relative and just say, I'm not okay with you picking him up, hugging him, putting them on your lap. So you set the boundaries for everybody around you. There are really sensitive situations as well, in which case you just say, I'm going to be there watching like a hawk. Because if I feel like I can't explain or I feel like I can't talk about it publicly, then I'm still my child's protector. It's my job to navigate that for them and not place all the pressure on them to be able to do that with an adult. Yeah, one more.
Since you've been doing this, cell phones are probably more important. So that's social media. And I guess the other two-part question, have you seen that real impact on children's psyche? Number two, has that led to any kind of decrease learn these discerning skills?
Social media?
Yeah, social media in particular, I guess.
So have I seen an increase with social media in, would you say, grooming or unsafe things?
Also like an impact, like a deleterious impact on like children's psyches.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's tons of research that talks about social media and why it's so bad for our kids, yet we're all allowing it. We're all doing it. And I'll try to stop there because I'll get on a soapbox. But I have a deep concern for how we're all drinking the Kool-Aid, as I say it. So I keep dating myself with these references. But we're buying into a belief that everybody's doing it, so it must be okay for our kids. But social media is so damaging. Just the comparison alone. But then it is the new field for cyberbullying, for grooming, for desensitizing kids. And we expect our young people to be wise and discerning in ways they just aren't. Matter of fact, we're not wise and discerning. Matter of fact, I think I'm kind of wise and discerning, and I fell for a con this week or started to. So you can see why would we expect our kids to be able to do that? It comes with a lot of practice, and even then it's still hard. So for sure, technology, social media, cell phones, the use of those things has heightened all that deeply. And as somebody who counsels, I will tell you the amount of children younger and younger who are sexting and sending naked photos and on Snapchat, sending all kinds of inappropriate conversations is exponential. I kid you not. I was just working with a child in the last few weeks who not even in 7th grade yet, and had Snapchat and had at least 45 males on Snapchat that they were sending her naked photos of themselves, and she was sending pictures back. Her parents didn't even know she had Snapchat on the phone. I told her not to have Snapchat. She downloaded it, and she was involved in pretty grievous things, not even a 7th grader yet. And it's happening younger and younger because as parents, we're letting down our guard. We're accepting the belief that it's normal for our kids to have these things, and I don't want to be the abnormal or the crazy parent who says no, or I don't want my child to feel different, so we're handing them over to a powerful current that is taking them away. The goal isn't to keep them away from technology. Technology does wonderful things, but we're not understanding the current that is taking them and how strong it is, and that they may not be strong enough to go against the current. That's my concern, and that we're not being proactive enough in it. All right, Barrett, should I hand it back over to you?
Yep. Jill, does anybody have any other questions? These are such great questions.
One more.
Yeah.
I can't agree with you enough about what you just said.
And personally, my husband and I, we've taken social media off of our phones, so we have less access to it, just to help us have better habits. My question for you is, kids are going to launch off, and they're going to be young adults.
Yep.
So if you were going to give some advice to somebody on how to talk with your kids about what choices they're going to make after they leave, what does that look like or sound like? Because the world that we live in is so digitized, and you're going to go to college and you're going to fight. They're going to be fighting a huge current, and so I've got a kid that I'm going to be launching next year, and she doesn't have any social media, and so there's this. I'm thankful that I've done that, but at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, do I say, hey, we should do a little practice on this? Do we give her access to something and then we are on it with her? Like, I need some wisdom about that.
Yeah, you don't want to be all or nothing. That's why you shield them, but you also equip them. And so technology is a great example. We have a son who's vision impaired. His lifeline is technology. He lives on it. And there can still be an addictive quality. And he's a good kid. He's not doing anything bad on it. He needs it to be able to function in a world that can see, and he can't. So we were constantly having these conversations about what should you go and what shouldn't you. And we would say to all of our kids, you know what, guys, when we give this device to you, there is a great deal of responsibility and accountability. So it's not preventing them from having technology, it's teaching them to steward the technology. And then the second piece is accountability, that I shouldn't give my kids anything that I'm not willing to also hold them accountable to. That's true with finances, it's true with any gift we give them, but technology especially, it should be an open phone, open technology home where you say, I will give this to you, but maturity shows accountability, that there should be nothing on this device that I can't put up on the screen for the world to see, and you're not ashamed of it. So let's start practicing that, what's wise to have, what's unwise to have. And so by the time they are launching on their own, you've already slowly been giving them opportunity to practice that. It's not all or nothing, because we know, that kids, they come out of a strict home, they go crazy. But when we give them opportunity after opportunity and you're putting in their hands, you need to be mature. You need to make good choices. It's no longer mom making the choices or dad making the choices for them. It's I'm being given an opportunity and I've got to prove what kind of life I'm going to choose to live. So it does make sense. At some point, I am encouraging them and I'm giving them opportunities to demonstrate that. Yeah. Yeah. All right, it's all you.
Thank you, Julie. What a privilege it's been to hear you tonight. Okay, it is such a privilege that the Lord has blessed us with the authority in our home and over our families. It is our responsibility to have these hard conversations with our children and our little people. I think it's really pretty cool that the parent equipping events that we've had have all ended and began and ended with, it's your responsibility to have hard conversations with your children. We support you and encourage you in that, and we'll do everything we can to help you have these conversations. But Julie has said it tonight, and we've heard it before. We have the hard conversations now for life to be a little easier when they're older. And I'm so grateful you've told us that again. Pastor Pete, will you pray for us tonight, please, and our families that are here? Y'all know that Pastor Pete and our children's ministry staff and our care and counseling staff here at the church, I know Kristen and Julie and Sonia are here tonight with us. Tommy Overton was here, so he was in the room somewhere. We would all love to support you in the raising of your families, so please raise the white flag if you need help. And before the flag turns red, raise the right flag, and we will help you. Yeah. Thanks.
Great. First of all, I want to personally thank you because I love the emphasis that you put on really the reality of life in a broken, fallen world. This is a very practical behavior modification city, and that doesn't really deal well with the heart. And I think you spoke well into that's our responsibility. And so again, the whole role play, the other assumption with that role play is you have an understanding of the way things work in your own heart and in other people's hearts. And you want to help your children discern that. So as I had a seminary professor say, yes, you want to believe the best about everybody, but because of the doctrine of depravity, watch your back, because they'll stick a knife in it. So anyway, all right, let me pray. Thank you. Our gracious Heavenly Father, it is a joy and a privilege for us as parents, because you have entrusted the stewardship of these children to us. We're fearful. We make mistakes. And I thank you that you are a God of redemption, that you are a God who loves our children more than we do, that you are looking after our kids better than we can. I pray that you would help us to learn how to trust you with our children. But in order to do that, we need to grow in our understanding of who you are so that we do learn to trust you more and not be so controlled and influenced by our fears. Thank you for tonight. I pray that the wisdom that was gained would go deeply into our hearts and that we would then instill these things into our kids to help them understand not just their own hearts, but also the hearts of other people And the heart is deceitful and wicked above all things. Who can understand it? We can't, but you can. So help us to be wise. And thank you again for this, and give Julie safety of travels as she goes home. And also for her conference tomorrow, give her wisdom, discernment, freedom to forget herself and to exalt you. And we ask of this in Jesus' name. Amen.